If there is one airline that has been impacted the most by the COVID-19 pandemic, it must be Cathay Pacific. Their passenger numbers are just at 1% of their pre-pandemic numbers, and they haven't been any higher since March of 2020. So why is Cathay hit particularly hard, and how does the future look like for the airline? Let's talk aviation. If you enjoyed this video, remember to like and subscribe. This really helps the channel grow and makes it easier for others to find. Cathay Pacific is the flag carrier of Hong Kong and was in 2019 the 10th largest airline in Asia with about 35 million annual passengers and a revenue of about $13.5 billion. The airline focuses on a strong global network from its hub at Hong Kong International Airport and its fleet of almost exclusively wide-body aircraft. All was going relatively well for the profit-making airline when the pandemic hit, but things changed quickly. Due to the strict travel restrictions for passengers to and from Hong Kong and the lack of a domestic market, the airline was forced to cut its flight schedule by 96% for April and May of 2020. One day in the beginning of April, the airline flew no more than 582 passengers on one day, a decrease of 99.5%. By the end of 2020, the airline had already lost $2.8 billion and was bleeding cash fast. Cathay always had a strong cargo division next to its passenger operations, but this was hit hard as well. Under normal circumstances, a lot of air freight is not transported by dedicated freighter planes, but rather in the belly of passenger aircraft. To prevent the airline from going under, the government from Hong Kong and Cathay Pacific made a deal worth over $5 billion to save the airline. In return, the government would become a minority shareholder in the airline, and after strong cost-cutting measures, the airline limited its losses in 2021 to about $720 million, while the strict travel restrictions in Hong Kong stayed in place. Just like in neighboring China, the government of Hong Kong tries to keep COVID out of the country at all costs by limiting who can come in, and this includes flight crews. Pilots and flight attendants that come in from high-risk countries must stay in quarantine for 2 weeks upon return, and in response, Cathay changed the flight schedules so that the crew would fly non-stop for a couple of weeks, staying in designated hotels before flights, both abroad and in Hong Kong, and after their shift, the crew would stay in a quarantine hotel for 2 weeks in Hong Kong before they would get a couple of weeks off. In response, some pilots have said that they will resign if the working conditions aren't improved. In March of this year, 2 years after the start of the pandemic, the passengers numbers were still down at 1% of the pre-pandemic March 2019 levels. The only upside is that it has doubled when compared to the year before, but that wasn't so hard to do. However, there seems to be some light at the end of the tunnel, as the quarantine rules are relaxed ever so slightly. For example, transfer passengers are again welcome at Hong Kong and are exempted from the quarantine rules. As mentioned before, not only the passenger side of Cathay's operation is affected, their cargo division is hit hard as well. The airline has a fleet of 20 dedicated 747 freighters, and Hong Kong has been one of the largest air cargo hubs of the world. But here too, the hard restrictions impacted the flight crew, and the cargo operations were down by 70% compared to pre-pandemic levels. But they are recovering again, now that the borders are reopening. In an attempt to increase their cargo capacity, the airline converted 6 of its 777s to so-called freighters. Here, the passenger seats in economy class are removed to make space for cargo in the passenger cabin. Once demand for passenger flight returns, the seats can be placed back and the plane can fly on as if nothing had happened. Before we have a look at the future of Cathay, let's have a quick look at their fleet. Cathay Pacific has a relatively modern and young fleet. They have 43 A350s with an average age of less than 4 years. And keep in mind, most of these aircraft haven't flown for the past 2 years. Furthermore, the airline has a large number of A330s and 777s for its wide-body operations. And on the short-haul side, the airline has a handful of A320 family aircraft. But those will replace soon, as the airline has an order for 11 A321neos that will be delivered this and next year. For the wide bodies, they expect another 5 A350s in the coming years, and no earlier than 2025, they will see 21 777-9s become part of their fleet, if they come at all, since there have been talks in the past years to defer or even cancel the order. The future of Cathay is hard to predict. Much will depend on COVID restrictions in Hong Kong and how well the airline is able to start up back again after 2 years of essentially not flying. If the pandemic hasn't been enough already for the airline, due to the Russian invasion of Ukraine, the airline won't fly for Russian airspace any longer. Their flight from Hong Kong to New York became the longest by distance in the world, by being over 10,300 miles or almost 17,000 kilometers long. The 17-hour flight no longer flies directly over Russia and the North Pole, but rather flies over Western Europe and the Atlantic. Did you know about the dire situation of Cathay Pacific? And how well do you think the airline will be able to recover, if they will at all? Let me know in the comments below. Thank you for watching, and please consider subscribing to Let's Talk Aviation.